Hello, hey everybody. Don't mind me playing with my hair as always. You guys can't really. All right, stop. All right, I did it. I look perfect. Um, Welcome back. This is my I don't know third stream so far. Hopefully my audio is working and I'm not making the same audio mistakes as I did before. I don't know if anybody is watching, but that's fine. You don't have to watch. I record these things and I upload them to YouTube as regularly as I can. I just put up my second video on YouTube just minutes before I went live right now. So you can either watch me live right now and ask me questions or anything like that, or you can go watch my last VOD that I did. All that stuff is on YouTube, as there are clips. There are clips which I answer full questions, and I put those up on YouTube when I feel like they're, not necessarily good questions, but good answers. Very often I get good questions. I don't always have good answers. So hopefully you can find those clips on YouTube, and I do put clips here on Twitch as well, but I find that the way Twitch does the clipping, it's a little more constrained on how you can clip things when you use the built-in clip feature. With YouTube, I try to encapsulate the whole of an answer of a whole question. So those clips are a little longer on YouTube, actually, than they are on Twitch. If you look for the Twitch clips, so they're a little different. I also put forward those clips on Reddit or things on those lines as well sometimes. Mostly just to kind of like promote the channel and let people know, um, you know, that I'm live and that it's happening and that they can follow me and ask me questions and all that stuff if they want. Now today I have a Dungeons and Dragons stream actually around 8 o'clock. I was told by my DM that he's running a little bit late, so I will jump on board there as soon as they're ready. And if I have any viewers, I'll drag them over to that channel at Coven MTG, where we're playing Tomb of Annihilation, which very obscure adventure. I'm sure no one's ever heard of it. So I'm just doing some bookkeeping stuff right before I start, and then we'll jump into the book and chatting about the Black Hand, playing the Sabbat where we left off. And yeah, that sounds right. Oh, that's not working correctly. That's fine. That's fine. Just edit that here. No one will be the wiser. Boom. Scintillating viewing, I'm sure. Okay. Letting everybody know that I'm streaming and all that stuff. And here we are. Okay. So, let's talk about the Sabbat, Vampire the Masquerade, and all that. I actually did get an interesting question offline just a moment ago, and maybe I'll share that with you guys, actually. Here, let's switch to our book view. Oh, whoops, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that live. All right, there we go. So let's switch to our book view, and I will look up the question right here. Boom. Okay. So I got an interesting question about basically Crowned in Shadow, and of course a lot of that stuff was put into the Black Hand playing the Sabbat as well, about the Lasombra and the change that I made to the Lasombra, specifically about Obtenebration and why I thought it was an interesting idea to basically here, I'm going to close this and do that. Okay. and why I presented the Lasombra as I did in Crowned in Shadow, um, and all that. So here, I'll just read the question, and then I'll answer it. How's that? So the question is, what made you decide to give the Lasombra Obfuscate instead of Oblivion? And why did you decide to do Abyss Mysticism as projects? This using the project system, and all that. And there was a bit of a back and forth, but I'll get into that question and kind of into the concept of my thinking on that. So as we can see in Crowned in Shadow, the Lasombra here are presented as a clan with Dominate, Obfuscate, and Potence as their clan disciplines. And Oblivion is kind of, not really mentioned. And basically, in the side note, it says that if they choose a predator type that gives them Oblivion, they can take Obfuscate instead. So that way it kind of covers all the bases, as it were. I think the main reason I decided for Obfuscate instead of Oblivion for this kind of conception of Lasombra is I wanted, first and foremost, I wanted to give players an option to play a clan that they might be very, very familiar with as Lasombra without having to really get into the weeds of Oblivion, which isn't really a power to everyone's tastes. It's kind of a bifurcated power. It's a very prereq heavy power, as I've spoken of before. Its mechanics kind of run contrary to the simplified design of V5. As I said, it spits stains out randomly at players, which, is just not great for the way stains work mechanically and what stains are supposed to represent. That should really be, you should be really getting stains as part of a player's actions. It's like players should be deciding to take stains. They should be doing actions that, harm their humanity, that kind of thing, and endanger their humanity. And if they're using powers that are inherently corruptive, they should be deciding to take those stains on as part of the power, not the power just, shooting stains at them randomly depending upon what number they roll on a die. That, kind of undermines the whole narrative and mechanical conception of stains and the humanity system. Beyond that, of course, Oblivion very much had the focus of Lasombra and Hakata, and the powers are very much split between kind of necromancy and shadow, and the rituals or whatnot in Oblivion kind of step on the toes of blood sorcery. I actually think a lot of the necromantic parts of Oblivion would make a lot more sense as a subsect of blood sorcery powers, which is how I've written them in my own home games. I run a home game set in 1999. And so the Giovanni figure pretty prominently in that game. In fact, one of the players is a Giovanni. And so she actually has, dominate, potence, and blood sorcery. And there are several blood sorcery rituals and powers, which are very necromancy focused, which she has decided to take, though she didn't have to, actually. But they very much are flavored in that way. And I have a kicker for necromancy, much as I do with Obtenebration, vicissitude, chemistry, so that when you use those powers, they have certain drawbacks, limitations specifically for them. That kind of flavors them as necromantic powers. I don't remember the exact wording of how necromancy works, but that I feel that would be getting a bit off topic. So basically, in V5, the stylized, what used to be considered the clan-specific discipline sets, like your Serpontis, your Quietus, your Thanatosis, let's say, and obviously necromancy was conceived originally for the Giovanni, and so on and so forth, and of course chemistry. Those powers, vicissitude, of course, and obtenebration, So those powers, for the most part, in the V5 conception, were, instead of becoming their own separate power set, in V5, mechanically, the way they were conceived is basically they would become amalgams. So Serpontis, I believe, is an Obfuscate Presence amalgam. I might be wrong. Basically, so you see those kind of classic Serpontis powers like Eyes of the Serpent. There. Chemistry, of course, is an amalgam of, I don't remember off the top of my head, Obfuscate Presence, I think, again, maybe. This seems a popular combination. And of course, Vicissitude is a Protean Dominate amalgam, which, I don't know if I would have done it that way. I think if I would have had my pick, I would have given Zemese Auspex Animalism and Blood Sorcery, and I would have made Vicissitude maybe an Animalism Blood Sorcery amalgam. I don't really know. I would have to think about that. I actually kind of like that Protean is now on so many clans. Followers of Set, aka Ministry now have Protean. Um, of course, Zemese now have Protean. I think that's actually think that's fantastic. I think Protean basically being locked up in the Gangrel clan um, wasn't so great. I actually kind of like Zemese with Protean. I think Dominate is kind of the odd man out. Dominate's such a common discipline in V5. Like basically everybody and their mother has Dominate. I don't think I would have given it to Zemese. It's not really, old clan Zemese. Aside, it was never really part of their central conceit. I feel Auspex makes a lot more sense for Zemese characteristically than Dominate does, but that's just personal flavor. I don't really think it matters. Basically, long story short, those powers, those like clan specific powers, were now basically being substituted with these amalgams. Or in the case of the Assamites, basically just subsumed into blood sorcery, or what we would call the Banu Hakim now, which I think works just great. Mechanically, it's much smoother. You have a smaller subset of disciplines. You don't have to constantly be like generating new disciplines basically for each clan that like pops up out of the woodwork. It's just a lot more streamlined, a lot smarter mechanically. And I thought that when V5 kind of deviated to that, which obviously Oblivion is kind of this sore thumb, that really weakened it mechanically, narratively altogether. I mean, and there's lots of reasons for why that happened that I don't, want to get into. And probably wouldn't even be appropriate for me to talk about, to be honest. So let's just say that Oblivion kind of grew out of a very specific moment in V5's life cycle that is unlikely to, happen again. And it's kind of, lingered. And I think it's maybe the discipline with like the most powers of like all the discipline powers. I think it actually has more powers than like any other two discipline sets combined. And of course, that's mostly because it has all the rituals. It has like a whole book, which is just like chock full of Oblivion powers, of course. And the fact that it has to encompass all of necromancy and all of obtenebration all in one. So, there you go. That's why it's so jam-packed and kind of is taking on the same role as blood sorcery or, thaumaturgy took on in the older editions, where it was like the Swiss Army knife power, where basically, basically as long as it was a little creepy, spooky, it could do anything. So, like, it can open a door, but it has to do it in a creepy way, It is what it is. So I felt that Obtenebration should follow that mechanical beat of these streamlined powers, and therefore it needed to be an amalgam. In my conception, I thought Obfuscate made a lot of sense for Lasombra to have as an inherent power. I'm not the first one to think that. In fact, in my early days of LARPing in the 1990s, I played a Lasombra in a live-action game before Lasombra were really around. Like, I think the Player's Guide to the Sabbat was just like a few years old at that point. And they basically gave me Obfuscate. Like, I had Cloak the Gathering and like some other stuff, and those were like my shadow powers. And it made a lot of sense. I couldn't like grab anybody with tentacles, which is obviously what everybody who plays Lasombra wants to do, whether they admit it or not. But I could do a lot of the other creepy, spooky shadow stuff. I think my character's name was Lysander the Lasombra. Hilarious. But that was at Beauty and the Beast, which, I don't know, maybe that was like 96, 97, something like that. It was Mike and Ian LARP before, Mike became the CEO of White Wolf. And before Ian obviously wrote Changeling the Dreaming. But Obfuscate seemed a good fit, and very much Dominate, Obfuscate, and Dominate and Potence and Obfuscate would make for some very interesting amalgam possibilities when you think of the like shadow power stuff. So that felt like an easy way to go. So I was a long story short, amalgams seemed to be the narrative mechanical way that V5 was going to handle these like clan specific disciplines going forward, and it seemed like Lasombra deserved that same kind of treatment, where they didn't have to have some weirdo specific power with strange mechanics that didn't fit the rest of the system. And so really in that conception, I also wanted to hit the main story beats of Lasombra Obtenebration powers in this book. And so, like, and also, I didn't want to totally discount kind of what had been built for Obtenebration in the past. So, like Dead Man's Hand is about as close to a necromancy power as you're going to get in the Obtenebration subset under this thing. It was basically just a mortal killing power when it comes right down to it, but it also lets you, wrestle and strangle ghosts, which, who doesn't want to do that? Arms of the Abyss, as opposed to Arms of the Ahriman, which, of course, that's, very sensitivity readers have told me that's a very unpleasant framing of that, unpleasant name for that power for various reasons. But, I don't know enough about that to really comment it one way or the other. But I actually prefer Arms of the Abyss as a name anyway. It's a level, I felt that if it had a tighter mechanical conceptual basis on restraining people, it could be a level 2 power, and it could still be interesting and useful, and not a kind of like yet again Swiss Army knife power where it's like cooking dinner for you and all that stuff, or while killing 30 mortals and driving in the car and so forth. Also, I believe as written, Arms of the Ahriman requires like a round to conjure the arms before they can be used, which I've never seen a storyteller actually enforce that. Combat in V5 is only supposed to be 3 rounds long. So any power that requires a round to turn on is basically useless in a fight. That's just the facts mechanically of V5, which is why you really see very few powers in V5 in the base core book or in the player's guide. That basically are like, you turn the power on and that wastes your whole turn. I mean, it basically makes that power combat-wise pretty useless. Outside of combat, of course, it doesn't really matter, but strictly as a combat mechanical point of view, you really shouldn't be having powers that take a round if they're powers that are supposed to be combat-facing, as obviously Arms of the Abyss or Arms of Ahriman would be. Very rarely do you need to conjure a dozen shadow tentacles, just at a party. I mean, if that was available at a party, I would go to that party. But as far as I know, that is not a party power. It's a combat power for the most part. And so on and so forth. I continued with Obtenebration, like, why not shove a corpse in your shadow? Or why not throw a bunch of shadows all over the place? And obviously, shadow body, shadow step. Everybody wants to turn into a shadow at some point. Obviously, that has pretty limited uses, so it didn't really seem like the end-all power. While Shadow Step is such a signature Obtenebration power, the fact that it was kind of locked as an Elder power in older editions of Vampire, I felt was not really necessary. It's not that powerful. I think the version as written here is very streamlined and worthy of a level 5, but not really beyond that. As someone has told me with this version, you can't, jump to the moon, obviously. And then, I feel that gets into Obtenebration pretty well. And as far as Abyss mysticism is concerned, why did it have to be like a project, or in this case, kind of plots, the kind of mini projects? And I felt that was mostly because these powers are very narrative-based. They're great for story, generating story, digging into story, solving problems in a story, creating new problems in a story, as one does when you dive into the Abyss or ask questions of the Abyss. But they weren't so much powers that would really, win you a fight, let's say, or necessarily change the political structure of the city, right? These are not powers that I would feel comfortable, forcing a player to like blow 20 experience points on, and then they only get to use them, once per story, or when they do get to use them, they are interesting investigatively or narratively, but they don't have like a big flashy impact in the moment. So I feel plots and projects are a really good place for powers like that can have interesting long-term narrative or story beat influences. Much like as MSA, basically building war ghouls or Avazd. Obviously, that can have pretty dramatic impacts. But I would feel strange, basically asking a player to like blow 20, 30 experience or whatever on an individual power. That would take a month or a year to activate, right? Like that's a lot to ask of them. So plots and projects kind of square that circle very nicely. They basically ask you to gather resources, to gather allies, to talk to your coterie or your pack, and basically put that together. And I think we're going to also have a nice twist on that in the Ivory Tower, playing the Camarilla, with how plots and projects work. And like, I don't want to get into it because that's still up in the air mechanically. But I think we've got some interesting stuff coming up there as well. So that kind of answers an unasked question as far as you guys are concerned, but was asked of me offline, and I thought was a good question, and perhaps you guys would appreciate an answer there to it as well. All right, so I still got some time. I believe I have at least half an hour until I have to skedaddle to this D&D game. Let's see. The Black Hand, playing the Sabbat. Okay, I've got a question. Okay, well, before I move on, I guess I have a question here. I'm not going to reply in a text. I'm going to reply by voice, obviously, Twitch. All right, did that work? Did it pin it? All right, so I should be able to pin it. All right, there. There we go. No, it's not showing it to you guys? All right, that's great. All right. Nonetheless, the pin is it's supposed to be pinned. Maybe it's not. Who knows? So the question is, to going back to my version of Arms of Ahriman, which I call Arms of the Abyss here. Was there anything specific that motivated you to want to remove the ability to do basic interactions with the tendrils and your reworking of the ability? Any thoughts on your version versus the original Shadow Play from V20? Well, that's an interesting question. I never really thought of Shadow Play as the original version, I guess. I thought of, the kind of Sabbat Player's Guide, Arms of the Abyss, as the original version, but I hear what you're saying. Well, two reasons. One, I actually have a lore sheet ability that lets you basically knock shit over with your shadow and stuff like that. So that was one thing I was thinking, that if you really wanted such a power, that you could basically just grab this really cheap lore sheet ability. Two, there is an Abyss Mysticism power, which lets you basically kind of empower and almost like separate your shadow. Not to mention an Abyss Mysticism power that lets you basically, give specters shadow bodies and stuff like that. So that kind of like making a living shadow, I felt was better outside of Arms of the Abyss. Also, I felt that I wanted people to have it sooner. I felt if I just made it very tight, this kind of like it restrains people power, and it kills mortals. Like mortals, it just rips apart. It just tears them apart like dolls. But vampires, it'll restrain, which is also a very V5 mechanic of basically mortals are fucked while other supernaturals have a chance. So I felt by making it that tight conceptually, where it can't help you repair your it can't change the oil on your car, but it can hold mortals or rip them apart or horrible things that's very specific, or like kind of form a barrier or a wall, would allow it to be level 2. which I felt was a better place for it than level 3. I think once you get to level 3, you're looking at some very useful powers, and I don't think Arms of the Abyss, even with the utility, really hit that. And I feel that in the original writing of, sorry, not Arms of the Abyss, Arms of Ahriman. And I feel in the original writing of Arms of the Ahriman, they were really leaning on that one round to activate part of the power to kind of balance out the rest of the power, and I just didn't really feel that was realistic or a good way to balance power. So that it definitely was much better than basically any other level 3 power out there. So I still wanted it to be useful. I still wanted it to basically be something that you could, conceptually compare with Arms of the Ahriman, and still be a useful power. So even if you were to use Oblivion in your powers or whatever, Arms of the Abyss would still be, a pretty useful power in of itself. It's also why I named it something different. I wasn't really intending it to completely replace Arms of the Ahriman. Yes, I think it is the you mentioned the lore sheet. I believe the lore sheet is actually the Angels of the Abyss lore sheet, which is reprinted in Crowned in Shadow. It's originally from the Black Hand playing the Sabbat. I might be wrong. Yes, so that's a level 3 power called Shadow Mine. You have mystical control over your own shadow, and the stains of the abyss do not linger on your soul. So once per story, you can retroactively exceed on a failed remorse roll, which, not that useful, actually. And at the storyteller's discretion, you may be also be able to exert limited control over your own shadow. Your shadow can manipulate objects as heavy as an envelope, can be used to form messages, hide your face, put out a candle. Just, basic kind of shadow stuff. I mean, I guess for shadow play, like originally Obtenebration level 1, I believe, was called shadow play, mostly because, of the song. I mean, probably. Kind of one of the most iconic goth songs there is. It's Joy Division. So that's probably why they wanted to include it as a power name. But Shadow Play as a level 1 power was probably one of the weakest, most useless level 1 powers in Vampire the Masquerade, unfortunately. Which is pretty common for these like antagonist powers. Usually the low levels were like kind of useless. And then the higher levels were, absolutely insane. So I think kind of to discourage PCs from even wanting to get them. Except for maybe Serpontis. Serpontis had 2 very overpowered low-level powers. Eyes of the Serpent and Tongue of the Serpent. Probably one of the most overpowered level 1 and level 2 powers in the game. Consistently. And then I think level 3 was something like Mummify, which was basically useless. So as far as shadow play is concerned, I don't think there was a lot to it, and it kind of disappeared like very quickly. It was replaced, I believe, by Shroud of Night as like the level 1 power, which of course was pretty overpowered. Shadow play, I think it allowed like bonuses to intimidation checks. You could hide your face. You could like make shadows loom, that kind of thing. It was very bit out of place. It didn't really have a lot, like when compared even to like Gleam of Red Eyes, it didn't really do much for you, I think. I would say as far as so there we go. Definitely it's something for like messing with your own shadow or your own shadow doing things. I feel not only is it a kind of core Lasombra power, but it's part of their aesthetic. I think that's one of the reasons I felt like messing with their Bane with distorted reflection and all that. This kind of like concept of like the living shadow or a shadow superimposed on your features, that kind of thing. That seems more of a intrinsic part of the clan that should be part of their drawback, not necessarily part of their power set, though it also makes sense as part of their power set. But to get back to the Black Hand playing the Sabbat, I know we didn't get very far. Last I checked, we had kind of gotten to the introduction, and I'm happy for more questions. Like, feel free to throw questions out. I don't mind, going off topic, as it were, to answer questions. I will try to make a little bit of progress. Yeah, no, my pleasure, man of leisure. I'm glad it's useful to people's games. I hope it helps people come up with their own stories and conceptions. I don't think anybody should take anything I say as like the gospel or the truth or canon or anything like that. Um, I've worked on official and unofficial products. They both, have their strengths and weaknesses, but I'm definitely not the god of Vampire the Masquerade. No one is, and I hope at best that anything I say people can take and it'll generate new story ideas. Hopefully, not hopefully, but maybe probably completely divergent than anything I've thought of, and I hope that creates really great games. Um, a friend of mine just posted the other day that they had started running our adventure, Our Graves Are Empty, which was co-authored by Chris Handley, actually, who does a lot of writing for, I believe, Warhammer role-playing games and I think War Machine now. I'm not quite sure. I haven't kept exact track. And basically, what they were doing with the adventure. And it sounded really fun and interesting, and it's not necessarily the way I would have run it myself, but it sounds like it's a lot of fun for their players, which actually takes us to where we left off last time, which was after the styles of play section, where we come to our first I don't know if it's the first sidebar, but a sidebar that I thought was very important to include in this book, which was the Your Table, Your Sabbat sidebar, which, long story short, it basically tells you to use safety tools when playing games, especially a game that is potentially going to touch upon so many sensitive subjects, especially horror themed subjects, that kind of thing. But most importantly, that it's, your game, and that at your table it's your Sabbat and you can do what you want with it. And that nobody can tell you necessarily how to play Sabbat, or if you can play Sabbat. That's really up to you, and that's really the last word of it. Like, I can't tell you how to use my books. There are certainly people I would prefer not to play my games if they have unpleasant politics or something like that. But I can't stop them from buying the game or playing it the way they want. But definitely, I hope that people are using these games and these stories to, uplift their time and to play with their friends and to make a community of people that will be, will stand together in, outside of the game as well. That would be wonderful. Some of the closest friends I've ever made have been through Vampire the Masquerade, and specifically through Sabbat, actually, though I don't know if there's correlation there. The clan symbols here are from the Sabbat, from Sabbat the Black Hand, the V5 official book that I wrote on. The only new one of my own creation is the Path of Lilith symbol here, which I just put together with some Creative Commons art, because that's the way we do it. We gotta use the stuff that is available, free, legal, and ethical to use. And I'm an artist, but I don't really consider myself someone that capable at drawing. I did do all the layout and graphic design for this book and the current cover, but really I wouldn't consider that my strong suit, though I do enjoy it. And really, I kind of look to Mark Kelly's work as my benchmark. I don't really try to imitate Mark, but I definitely feel that his work has really defined V5 and its look. And so if I feel that if I am getting work that isn't necessarily like his, but that has a similar vibe or attitude to his work, then I'm basically going in the right direction. And of course, I guess the only main difference I probably like, I also like bright colors. So that's maybe my only twist on a V5 from a graphic design standpoint is I like the bright colors. I don't necessarily want only nighttime. I don't necessarily want only bar scenes. I do like bright lights, bright colors, and I especially like that time of day where the sun is just beginning to set. I think that is looks real good, and I think vampires crawling around while the sun isn't technically all the way down is maybe a little scarier. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Um, I could go over the Sabbat lexicon, um, but I don't think I will. I think I've talked about it a good bit. I guess the only things that I will mention is I really wanted to hit um, points and words that might not necessarily be obvious from people coming from a strictly legacy point of view. I knew a lot of people who were interested in this book would probably be legacy players who are used to having the Sabbat as a playable option, and people who are very committed to Sabbat, and that only a few people would basically be like, oh, it's this could be interesting for my game. What's the Sabbat about? Who've never encountered the Sabbat. So I really wanted to hit things that perhaps a legacy player might have a preconception of that wasn't really necessarily the way we were going to use that word. Like the difference between a seraph and a seraphim in this book is, pretty specific. And our idea of the role of the Book of Nod and Revelations of the Dark Mother um, as part of a greater body of theological work that the Sabbat basically is interested in. We wanted basically to hit that. We wanted to introduce the concept of the Dark Union because I felt that was a very interesting story beat, even though it's actually not a very big part of the book, nor a very prevalent like heresy in the book. But it is like kind of the central focus of one of the more interesting seraphim, in my opinion. Um, and we wanted to introduce the Oaxaca Diaries, of course. Um, I do mention the Perfecte in here simply because Path of Cathari is one of my favorite paths. I feel it's very interesting and has a lot of narrative depth that can be explored, and isn't just kind of like this hedonistic party path as it's sometimes put forward, as it has a lot of interesting points to it, and that the Church of Cain kind of, as it's somewhat conceived in some books, really probably steals the most from Path of Cathari, strangely enough, not really Path of Cain. And then last but not least, the Numinous Rite, which is a new concept that we propose in this book, which, yet again, similar to the way that I present Abyss Mysticism, similar to the way that I present the kind of flesh crafting plots in the New Flesh addendum. The Numinous Rite are very story-oriented Rite. They're kind of mechanically very simple, very basic. They don't have a lot going on there mechanically because they are conceptually unfinished, and it's basically presented to the storyteller and the players that these are Rite that perhaps, if you wish to make it a focus of your story, you could improve, you could make better, you can find a way to use them and improve upon them as a story beat. That would be a great use for projects to basically perfect one of the Numinous Rite, because they're all somewhat useful, but I think none of them, and they're all kind of all of them kind of break a game rule on some level. Like one awakens people from torpor regardless of their humanity. One does aggravated damage to elders based upon their blood potency, which sounds very dangerous, but of course it's kind of a broken Rite, so it's really great for killing middle managers, but basically useless against Methuselahs and the real elders, and so on and so forth. And of the Numinous Rite, there's several interesting ones. And they're all deeply flawed. They all kind of break rules, but I don't think any of them break the game. Um, I think there's one that basically like lets you reshuffle discipline dots into different powers and things along those lines, or even take amalgams in a different way. So it is a weird set of powers, and we wanted to make it clear that they're very narrative-based powers and powers that we want players, right, that we wanted players to kind of fool around with as a story element to possibly perfect or find if they're useful or not. Like these are basically the Numerus Vitae is a potential answer to the question of how do you defeat the antediluvians, and it's really up to your table if that is the correct answer, and how you go about making it the correct answer. But we didn't want to present like the be all end all answer within the book. We wanted to basically generate the potential answers from the players themselves, since obviously how to defeat an antediluvian is kind of beyond the scope of most games, but not all games. I'm sure there's some games that is what the game is all about. So continuing on, the first chapter, the creation rites. We do. I don't know if it's really fallen out of style, but I don't really see it that often anymore. Where you have kind of like these fiction, narrative story pieces in books. I always appreciated them. I think the kind of thing that was common in kind of earlier World of Darkness books, where you basically had like a whole like mini story, like 10 pages of like fiction right in the beginning. Um, I think that was a little overdone. I did write one actually for the Vampires Player's Guide, though that didn't end up getting published because we just needed the pages. Like we couldn't really afford like 4 or 5 pages of just pure fiction in the beginning of the Vampires Player's Guide. I think in the second edition book there is like a little mini fiction, but overall it's not so common anymore. I think V5 Core Book is really the last time you see just like this like long fiction intro in a book. Um, and then after that, it's really just not doesn't happen that often. I think the Anarch and the Camria books they have sections which have kind of longer fiction, but the book doesn't like open up with like a fiction story. Obviously, the Camria book, the Gehenna War section is basically just a long story. Both those books, to be fair, are very light on mechanics. Very very light on mechanics. That's not the mix of mechanics to fluff that I would prefer. Um, but I think that Gehenna War section, I mean, I'm biased, obviously, having rewrote it. It's very good, and kind of solves a lot of problems. So in this, we wanted to give some insights into the Seraphim. So basically, I believe each chapter. Yes, that's right, Matt. Good seeing you. That's Matt. That's true, Matt. They are the Cam and the Anarch books are light on a lot of things. It's one of the reasons that we're writing our own Cam book as well, because definitely one of the main complaints I've always heard as far as the Camria's guide is concerned, less from the Anarch guide, for various reasons, but the main reason that the main thing I've heard as far as the Camarilla book is that like it doesn't really tell you how to play the Camarilla, how the Camarilla is like set up, like what night to night Camarilla kind of business is like. Both books are very vibes based, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. They give you a lot of vibes about the Camarilla and the Anarchs, and if you read between the lines, especially the Camarilla book, less so in the Anarch book. Oh wow, that's a chat from like a billion years ago somehow getting in my highlights section. All right, let's remove the pin and see if that fixes that. Perfect. All right. All right, we're just gonna remove that now, since it seems to be not working the way I want it to. Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'll check a look at the. Oh, so in that lore sheet, Man of Leisure. So Man of Leisure, you're saying that the Angel of the Abyss lore sheet is in Crowned in Shadow, but you don't see it in that section in the Sabbat book. That lore sheet is actually from the Black Hand playing Sabbat originally, and then was put into Crowned in Shadow. So you actually can find that lore sheet in the main lore sheet section here. So I believe it's the breakup update. Yeah, there it is. Angel of the Abyss. So there it is. So it's actually in the Black Hand playing the Sabbat already because it was there before I put it in Crown and Shadow. So that's actually a lore sheet originally from the Black Hand playing the Sabbat. It was a lore sheet added to the book on a Valentine's Day, along with Redeemers of Enoch. No, that's fine. That's completely reasonable. It fits really well in Crowned in Shadow because it's a Lasombra oriented lore sheet. But yeah, in on Valentine's Day, I actually after Valentine's Day, I put in I think a total of 4 lore sheets. I put in Angel of the Abyss and Redeemers of Enoch. Angel of the Abyss is very Lasombra oriented and specifically kind of Path of Night flavored, thus Angels of the Abyss. And then Redeemers of Enoch is, of course, Banu Hakim, Assamite flavored, and, of course, very much focused on the Path of Blood. That's kind of conceptually where it's coming from. And it kind of, has an interesting quote from our Banu Hakim Seraphim, who's also very Path of Blood coded. The other 2 lore sheets, right, were Valerius Mayor, one of my favorite Red List dudes from back in the day. Always a funny guy, and you always need more reasons not to like Tremere, I find. And Chrysalis of Flesh, which was basically just something that basically this was before the Player's Guide came out, and of course, obviously, before I wrote the new Flesh. I think I just wanted more for the MSA and flesh crafting in general, and more ways to use what was given to us in the companion when it came to flesh crafting. I feel the way that was mechanically put together was very clunky, needed some fixes, and this lore sheet kind of fixes some of the problems with that. Clunky in that you need like 30 powers to do something which most MSA would find very basic, at least most MSA players want a specific fantasy when it comes to flesh crafting, and the way the companion powers were put together required you to basically take a very specific chain of like 3-4 powers to be able to do that. And so this lore sheet kind of solves that as best I could within the V5 framework. Also, this lore sheet, someone dared me to write a lore sheet in an hour, and that this lore sheet is the outcome of that. Hopefully, it's not too terrible. It took me an hour to write, so I mean, it is what it is. I think it's pretty good for that. But going back to what you were saying, Matt, the Cam and NR books are light on a lot of things, and the main thing is basically when you buy a book that is labeled Camarilla, that is labeled Anarch. The main thing you want it to do is tell you how to not just use those sects in your story and the vibes and concept of those sects, but the day-to-day play or night-to-night play. That's actually something Tattered Facade did very well, and like how to bring horror into your game night by night. I feel Second Inquisition did a pretty good job of how to use the Second Inquisition in your story in various different ways. But yes, I believe the Cam and Anarch books really didn't give a lot of insight to players on how they would play those sects, and what the night to night would be, and what they're all about from the player's perspective. So I feel that was kind of a weakness of those books overall. All right, I'm going to check in with my D&D group. Okay, it looks like they're still putting it together. That's good. So I got a few more minutes. So I'll head back up to where I was at by the introduction. And yeah, I hope they, Man of Leisure, I hope they do more with the red list. We'll see. I believe that there's only so much you can do with the red list. There's so many different interpretations and variations of it at this point, beyond like beyond the original book and Children of the Inquisition and all that, which are some of my favorite kind of like supplementary material to the lore. I felt those were really great books. They had interesting art, interesting concepts. Perhaps they leaned a little too much on, big personalities, big figures, big NPCs. Like that kind of NPC theater never really interests me. But I felt that was a good vehicle for the lore and the larger world. That really maybe didn't do so well once they started doing some of the clan novels and all that, like what was it called, Masquerade of the Red Death, and some other books. I feel like a lot of those characters really didn't land. Other than maybe Lucida, none of them really did much for me as a reader or player at the time. But to each their own. I think for them to do anything with the red list now would be maybe a little difficult in a V5 setting, but who knows? I was at the Darkness Emergent LARP in Atlanta recently, and I got to play with Mark Meir and Miss Magitech. She actually was Victoria Ash, played my sire in that LARP, and of course Tigerius, her husband. And so that was very interesting. And there was some talk of red list there, as one of the main plot points was basically the trial of a red lister who turned himself in. I know his name. The player I know, of course, Voivode Maquette, one of my fave YouTubers on Vampire the Masquerade issues. But I don't remember the name of the red lister. He was like the Bruja from like the French Revolution red lister. I'm sure somebody knows off the top of their head. I'm not going to search Google for it. But basically, I think in the book, he's presented as being framed for all these murders or whatever. So it made for an interesting set piece for the story. I think they did a pretty good job there. With these LARPs, like I don't know if I'd call that a blockbuster LARP, but for these kind of like once a year setting LARPs, I think it can be very difficult to have interesting plot things going on and intrigue. A lot of the play is around characterization. When you only play like once or twice a year, and the story continues but not directly, it's kind of indirect continuing of story, which is very different than the LARPs that I was used to as a young bat in the 90s. We would only play LARPs over a weekend like 2-3 times a year, certainly, but it would be a very committed group of people that were really invested in the stories, not just the characterizations. And so you could really dig deep into plot stuff. And I think that's harder to do when you don't necessarily know who's coming each time, and the casting, you don't have as tight a control on the casting and all that. But that's neither here nor there. That's more like LARP stuff. I'm sure Matt probably could educate us more on the LARP stuff, the modern LARP stuff, than I ever could, actually. You just hear old fogey stories from me. Back in my day when we LARPed. So in any case, we wanted to give people a taste of the Seraphim and what they were about beyond their lore sheets, though I feel the lore sheets do a pretty good job of explaining them. And so each chapter, and I think there are only 4 or 5 chapters really in the book, has a little short fiction. I think the longest one is 4 or 5 pages. We tried to make it just a page or two. So we feel that hopefully we get an idea of where these seraphim are coming from, and to understand that they're not like super power. Not necessarily, some of them are, but not all of them are super powerful like elder boss monsters that are like pushing you around. Some of them, like the very first one we introduced, Oscar Abadia here, are young, and really their power comes from their ideas, um, and that's where they get their clout and people listening to them. So they're on some level they're almost like influencers. They have a cult of personality. It's not necessarily they're just like raw supernatural power that makes them seraphim. It's the fact that their ideas have taken a hold of some subsection of the Sabbat, and that people are basically willing to fight and kill for them, even if they themselves individually are not that powerful. Yeah, I would agree with that on some level, Matt. That kind of, I'd say, revolving a LARP around a big name NPC isn't necessarily. That's not necessarily the way I would write my games. It's not really of interest to me. Those like stories don't really do too much for me. I think it can be interesting if it's done well, especially if you have a good player for those characters. I think for me, usually the way I've seen it done is like the storyteller or somebody like kind of like in the inner circle of the LARP group wants to play XYZ named character, and so you let him, and who cares if he does a good job or not. I think in the case of Darkness Emergent, obviously, yeah, they got a very talented person to play both Tigurius and, of course, Victoria Ash. So they were very fortunate in that. And of course, those people, as I'm sure you'd appreciate, were really playing it not so much in the Nordic style of like playing the lose, but they were definitely there to generate story, not like step on toes and throw their weight around and all that kind of thing. They were definitely ringers, but the good kind of ringers. But yeah, I would say that if your story revolves specifically around some big name NPC, that probably makes your job as an ST harder, not easier. And if you feel like it's making your job easier, then you've probably taken a wrong turn someplace, and you should readjust the work. Because to get those characters right and the story right around those characters takes a lot of work, especially if you want to dig into the depth of those characters in a way that's makes sense for them. Like Tigurius in particular, I feel could be a very tricky character to get right in a story, simply because of all their backstory, the issues with the Ashira, and the kind of Bana Hakim, Asamite, blah blah blah. I mean, it could get pretty hazy there. All right. So let's say I've got about 5-10 minutes left, and that's I think enough time to explore a part of the book which we put right up front because it's kind of the heart and soul of the issue when you're talking about Sabbat is what about paths, right? So we really delve into what paths are about. But that's not really the heart of this section. The heart of this section, I feel, is basically how we systemize that mechanically, and we really decided to do it in the simplest possible way we could, which was we liked V5's humanity system, we liked touchstones, we liked convictions, we liked stains. None of it is perfect, but we felt it really did a lot for Vampire the Masquerade that the old systems of paths and enlightenments, and more importantly the old system of humanity and the old hierarchy of sins, really didn't serve Vampire the Masquerade very well from the very first days, to be honest. I feel they're kind of grounded in a very old school kind of thinking of role-playing games. It's a very simulationist concept of role-playing games, and so you wanted something to mechanically simulate people's moral degradation with this kind of like a resource management system almost. And it probably worked for its time, and maybe a more subtle or narrative system just maybe wouldn't have worked well, or would have been appreciated by a simple-minded role players of the 1990s. That's possible. That's very possible. Who knows? But certainly nowadays, vampire and role playing games in general have completely outgrown the way humanity used to be constructed, and definitely how Hierarchy of Sins used to be constructed. It was very kind of tight, regimented, and in many cases incoherent. So the current system, much better. The current humanity system makes a lot more sense, and I feel that in this book we kind of refine it. We kind of step away from humanity basically being this strictly moral concept, and in many cases kind of Christian moral concept, and turn it into strictly a idea of identity. It's like how much of your humanity, how much of your human identity remains, or as the vampire style guide would prefer me to say, how much of your mortal identity would remain. It's like funny that they don't want me to use the word human, even though one of the core mechanical concepts is called humanity. But it is what it is. So how much of your mortal identity remains becomes basically the core of humanity. So you keep your humanity rating even in the Sabbat, in this mechanical conception. It just becomes a kind of shorthand for how much of your mortal identity remains. Even though you're starting to follow this path. And we felt that was a very simple, elegant way to mechanically adjudicate the paths of enlightenment without throwing in a bunch more, layers of mechanics that I feel, I never want to do that. Like the less the new mechanics I have to throw at a player or an ST, the better. The more I can use the existing frameworks to do what I want, the better. Just like I was saying before with how I prefer Obtenebration as an amalgam, how I prefer necromancy as maybe a subset of blood sorcery, that kind of thing. The more I can use what already exists and works and is elegant, the better. The less I have to create things from whole cloth, which may clash with other mechanical systems I'm not even thinking about, as Oblivion does with the Humanity and Stain system, the better. Then I'm not potentially inventing something new that's gonna blow everything up in a way I didn't even realize, which I'm sure any coder or programmer can appreciate. You always want to use what's there that works, as opposed to inventing something new that might blow shit up in a way you didn't even conceive of. Or might trip somebody up who comes after you who doesn't even know to be looking for that issue. You don't want people creating new powers, systems, clans, whatever, that's going to run afoul of something you just threw in to solve some other issue that's going to cause some new problems for the guy who comes after you. So the sidebar here kind of lays it clear, which is, no path ratings. So there's no individual path ratings. Like you keep your humanity rating, it's probably going to go down. You're going to lose pieces of yourself, kind of as the opening quote alludes to. You're going to lose pieces of yourself, but maybe that's worth it. If it means the antediluvians go down with you, maybe that's worth it, to be free in a sense. That's really up to you. So at this point, I basically have to cut over to the D&D game that I am a part of. Thanks for joining me. If you did, I hope this wasn't too rambling or useless. Hopefully I got some interesting information out there. I'll upload this to YouTube, possibly make some clips when I can. Go back to my giant face mode. And I will see about, I don't know, rating the D&D thing. I'm not quite sure how that works. Maybe I'll figure it out. So thanks again for joining me. and I hope we can do this again soon. And feel free to send me questions, even offline, or chat with me offline. I'm all over the place. I'm at KKhalil on Twitter, and all that. And I'll see you next time.